If you work in utility safety or ops, you know the landscape changes fast. New safety solutions, updated grounding procedures, and the constant push for better leadership. It's a lot to keep up with. That's where Incident Prevention Magazine comes in. We are the industry's go-to source for real-world safety solutions. From in-depth articles on arc flash protection to ready-to-use tailgate topics for your crew, IP gives you the knowledge, insight, and strategy you need to get everyone home safe. Don't just react to the job, stay ahead of it. Subscribe today at incidentprevention.com. That's incidentprevention.com.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Incident Prevention's Utility Safety Podcast. I'm Kate Wade, the editor of Incident Prevention Magazine, and your host for this episode. Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Eric Rogers, a high-impact sleep coach and former sleep specialist for U.S. Navy SEAL teams. He is the founder of Peak Sleep LLC, which is dedicated to helping busy professionals improve their sleep so they can perform better, achieve more, and enjoy a greater quality of life. In this episode, Eric and I will discuss the critical nature of good sleep hygiene for workers employed in high-hazard industries like line work, the potentially unrecognized impacts that alcohol, sleep apnea, and other factors can have on our sleep quality, and some sleep improvement and fatigue management strategies that utility professionals and their employers can utilize to better safeguard the workforce, their customers, and the general public. And now I'd like to formally welcome Eric to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kate. Good morning. I'm very happy to be here. We've been trying to put this together for a while.
Very nice to see you. I know our listeners can't see you, but I have the pleasure of that. So let's kind of dig right in. Can you share, some background information with us to give everybody sort of a feel for, how did you get interested in this line of work? The experiences that you've had that have led up to what you're doing now?
Absolutely. Yeah, I sort of fell into this particular line of work. I was in the Army for several years, and I was working with Special Forces as an Army psychologist. And I was in a particular job where I started to struggle with my own sleep, like many people, when they are under stress. And so I started searching for a solution. And throughout that process, I got more and more interested and eventually started to specialize in it. And just realizing what it did for my life, I mean, literally life-changing. I just fell more and more in love with the subject. I started using it with the people I was working with, clients I was working with, started applying it, especially when I was working with the SEALs, started applying it as a performance enhancement tool, in addition to helping those who are actually struggling with sleep. And just seeing how quickly it worked, what sort of impact it had on their life, their performance. It's just something that I've become more and more passionate about. It's something that is not very valued in our society, unfortunately, and that's something that I'm going to spend the rest of my career trying to change.
That's awesome. And I think most people listening, like kind of what you said, I think people have some sense that sleep is important to our overall health and overall functioning. But can you really give us a good idea about why consistent good sleep is so necessary, and particularly in industries like utilities, where you have people serving in very hazardous roles where, a second that they're not paying attention could make the difference between life and death, literally.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head where, I think everybody knows sleep is important. They've heard the news stories. They know that it has a big impact on long-term health. They know that good sleep makes you feel less tired and makes you feel more energetic during the day. And while those things are absolutely true, that's just scratching the surface of what sleep does for you. And I tend to focus on the other elements. I always say that I consider sleep the most powerful performance enhancer on the planet. It affects literally everything else in your life that matters to you. So we talked a little bit about health, right? Your immune system, your physical strength, your pain tolerance, your resiliency. It impacts your social relationships, with spouses, with children, with coworkers. It makes you a better, stronger, more charismatic leader. But I tend to focus most on sort of the cognitive impact, right? What is it doing to our brain? I was just recently at a conference for a large Texas utilities company, and I asked the question to the audience what they felt was more important, proper use of PPE or your brain function. And it was unanimous. Every single person chose brain function, which I was glad to hear. I didn't know what the response was going to be honest with you. But I was glad because the brain is sort of the command center for every single decision you make and every single action you take. It all starts there. So if it's not functioning correctly, that's when a lot of bad outcomes are going to happen, right? And the number one way to ensure that your brain is functioning the way it should be is sleep, getting good quality sleep. So some of the things it affects: your judgment, your decision making, your mental health, your mental resiliency, your stress tolerance, your risk taking, how much risk you're going to take, right? Your attention, your concentration, your memory. Every single one of those things is dramatically, not minimally, dramatically impacted by how much and the quality of the sleep that you're getting. So it's incredibly important, especially in sort of those high risk, high demand professions. I tend to work these days with utilities companies, with military, and with first responders, right? All of those industries, there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of danger. You have to be able to make quick, accurate decisions, or accidents are likely to happen.
Well, and I think this just underscores how important it is that, in addition to the rules and regulations and PPE and all of these things that we have to have a good understanding of, what we're working with as humans so that we can make the best use of those things. Because if we can't think straight, there's not a whole lot of PPE that's going to be able to protect you from some of those things. So one of the things I kind of wanted to ask you about was, as particularly like in construction and things, there's sort of a higher rate of, alcohol, perhaps abuse, or just, culturally, uh, having a couple beers after work. So I'm curious what is the impact? So is there a difference between having, one or two beers before bed versus four or five? Like what happens if you have nothing to drink? And while I was, thinking about these questions, I was like, is there a difference between different types of alcohol? Like, let's say you prefer to drink, wine versus beer. I'm just curious about these things, and how they are impacting us, particularly if we're using them as a way, alcohol as a way to relieve stress.
Yeah. So this is an interesting one because a lot of people, like you just said, use alcohol to relieve stress. You have a long shift, you need to wind down. A lot of people turn to alcohol. A lot of people who struggle to fall asleep just in general turn to alcohol because it is a sedative, right? So it does help you fall asleep a little faster, but that is where the benefit ends. And it's really, I know to a lot of the listeners, this is an inconvenient truth, but alcohol is literally one of the worst things you can do for your sleep. And what it's what it's doing is it is dramatically damaging your sleep architecture. So a lot of people we know, we go through different stages of sleep throughout the night. Each stage is important. Each stage does something really important for us. And what alcohol does is it wreaks havoc on that structure. So it leads to incredibly poor quality sleep. So even when you get, let's say, the recommended amount of sleep, you're going to feel really poorly the next day because it was not nearly restorative enough, right? And to your question about does more alcohol lead to worse results? Yes, it does, right? So, but it's really important to note here that any alcohol in our system will lead to some negative impact on our sleep. There's no amount that you can drink that won't have an impact. But it is true that the more you drink, the worse that impact will be. Right? So what I generally say is and I will say that, do I still drink? Yes, I do. I drink a lot less and a lot less frequently than I used to, because what I have found is I feel so much better when I don't the next day, right? So if I have something really important the next day where I need to be on my game, the night before, I will not drink, right? Because I know the impact it's going to have. But I want to be transparent and say that, yes, I do still drink, but the impact or the amount and frequency is so much less because it does so much damage to your sleep.
Well, I have to say I'm fortunate in the sense that I am allergic to pretty much every type of alcohol, so I cannot drink anymore. But I have sort of a question that I didn't that I did not pose to you initially, but I am on a stimulant medication now. I started probably a year and a half ago, and so that impacts my sleep because it's a stimulant, right? So sometimes I have like the insomnia. And so on the one hand, part of the reason I'm on it is because it gets rid of my brain fog that I have because I'm a woman in a certain stage of her life. But then, I don't sleep as much. I don't dream when I don't feel like I ever get into that state. So I'm curious, how does that impact you? It's like I feel awake and I feel like I'm doing all the things and I don't have the brain fog, but if I'm not sleeping as much as I used to, not on the stimulant, what's the pro con there,
Sure. I always generally say what's most important is how you're feeling and how you are performing during the day. And we focus a lot, or in the news, you hear a lot about the amount of sleep we're supposed to be getting, right? 7 to 9 hours is generally the recommended amount for just about everybody. A very, very small percentage of the population can do well getting less than that. But most people, the vast majority, need 7 to 9 hours. And that's what we hear over and over, right? You got to get 8 hours. You got to get 8 hours. And that is important, but it's only half of it. The quality of your sleep matters just as much. So in your example that you just gave, this might be leading to some insomnia. Some medication does do that. And that may result in a little less sleep each night. But as long as the quality of that sleep is strong, you may feel just fine the following day, especially if the medication is helping you feel better in general anyways. So in those situations, I'd focus a little less on the quantity you're getting and focus more on just how are you feeling during the day, Are you feeling good? Are you feeling rested? Are you feeling productive? Then wonderful.
Good. I mean I am. I was just sort of curious about it, particularly because it's also a med that has a shortage and they were out last week. So I have this very real example to go, okay, this is what it's like for me, just normal, and this is what it's like for me when I'm on the med. And it's very different. But yeah, my quality of life is much better medicated. So um thank you for that. I will send the check in the mail for the medical counseling. I appreciate that. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about were the micro sleeps, because until you had mentioned those to me in previous conversations, I don't think I ever knew there was a word for that, or I'm not even sure if I knew about the phenomenon. So would you tell us like what a micro sleep is, and then why they are not great and how we prevent them from happening?
Absolutely. They're one of the most dangerous things that can happen to us. And interestingly, I think a lot of people don't know what microsleeps are. Somebody just asked me the other day, is that like a nap? A short sleep? No. Naps can be great. Microsleeps are incredibly dangerous. And what they are brief episodes, uh, one or a fraction of a second to a few seconds, where your brain literally shuts down and puts you to sleep. And this happens involuntarily and usually outside of your own awareness. So you don't necessarily even know it's happening. And it only happens when we are quite sleep deprived, right? So either we're sleep deprived because we've worked an extremely long shift. Maybe we've worked 24 hours straight, or we are sleep deprived because we have been getting insufficient sleep over multiple days. So both of those lead to dangerous levels of sleep deprivation. And I think that's important to state, because I think when people usually think of sleep deprivation, they think of just working nonstop or staying awake nonstop over a long period of time. And that is one form of it. But um, you also build up these dangerous levels of sleep deprivation by getting short sleep or inadequate amounts of sleep or good quality sleep over multiple consecutive days, right? So whenever we're in that state of dangerous levels of sleep deprivation, we are at risk of these micro sleeps happening, right? Because it is just your brain saying, look, I'm done. I am putting you to sleep now. And this is the main reason why there are such strict rules for long haul truckers, for a lot of pilots, about how long you can work before you need to take a break, right? Because you can imagine how dangerous it is if you've got a trucker who falls asleep at the wheel for 3 seconds, and what that can cause, right? So that is a microsleep, and they are more likely to happen when we are very sleep deprived, and especially when we are doing a task that is a little boring or mundane, right? So when you are very tired and then you do a boring or mundane or repetitive task, and the easiest example is driving.
Well, yeah, what I was gonna say is it just makes me think about all the linemen that go down to the storms and they work all the storm restoration, and then, they haven't slept. They've been working 16 hours shifts, and then they get back in the truck and they've got to drive all the way home, and, maybe it's a couple states away and they're tired and they're just sitting behind the wheel. I feel like that's like a perfect time for that to happen. So you see these accidents that happen for, those reasons.
That is absolutely the highest period of danger for them. They are at greatest risk during that drive after a long shift. Because to be honest, when you are actively working, especially in a dangerous environment, your adrenaline is high. And often it is high enough to prevent a microsleep from happening on the job. But when you are done, that danger decreases and you get behind the wheel and do something you do every day, your brain can relax, and that's when it's going to shut down. So when I'm talking to a lot of leaders in utilities about accidents, the vast majority of the accidents that they describe are driving related.
Yep.
And that would be probably the number one reason why.
Well, and we're going to talk about some, strategies and things in a little bit, but I just did want to make a mention, and I think it was Jim Vaughn, who's one of our regular writers for incident prevention, but one of the, coping mechanisms or ways to address this particular problem that he talked about was actually just sending new drivers. Like if let's say you are in, I don't know, Illinois, where I am, you have to send people to Florida. Like maybe you just send new drivers down, you fly them down, or, if you've got people down in that area, but don't make those same guys who have just been working, for a week or 2 weeks straight, then have to get in the truck. Get people who have the freshness, and also know that like you're no longer in, under that emergency, like storm proclamation. So you still have to follow all of the rules, and because some people, they get pulled over on their way home from storms and they don't necessarily understand why. It's just a very dangerous kind of time period. So the more we can educate people about how to handle it. Yeah.
I should also note that while I think the greatest risk is driving following a lengthy shift, there is also quite a bit of risk in the very early morning drive to work, right? Because I won't go into great detail about this, but we have circadian rhythms, and there are peaks and valleys in these circadian rhythms that dictate how alert we are during certain periods of time. And the trough, or the lowest point in the circadian rhythm, happens very early in the morning, sort of that 2 to 5 a.m. time period. So if you have been working a few days and you're already tired and maybe you did not get a good night's sleep, you are still at risk during that time period as well on the drive to work, because your circadian rhythm is at its most vulnerable point.
Well, so does that mean that, if you have people who are working like a third shift kind of job, like an 11 to 7 or something like that, did they, because of their circadian rhythms and things, did they have more susceptibility to, making errors because of the time of day that they're working and how our bodies are optimally supposed to work?
Yeah, our bodies are not at all designed to work at night. We are hardwired. Our circadian rhythms are hardwired to be alert during the day and sleeping at night. And we get around that. We work shifts. People listening to this call work ungodly numbers of hours and work through the night many times. But yes, you are much, much more vulnerable whenever you're working at night, simply because your body's not meant to do that. And it's never going to fully adjust to that. You can get a little better. You can move your circadian rhythm a little bit, but it's never going to be, it's never going to fully adjust to you being alert at night and sleeping during the day. That will always be challenging and dangerous.
Well, and it sounds like maybe, if you have people who are working those third shifts, like it's good if you at least have like two people working together so it can be like a buddy check system. So at least you're not alone trying to handle that.
Absolutely.
Um, well, let's move to sleep apnea for a minute because that's sort of a big topic. That was something my father-in-law, gosh, he's passed away about 20 years ago, but he had very bad sleep apnea and ended up having a massive heart attack. And so I know it can cause, a lot of health problems, but tell me also how it's just impacting your sleep. Especially if you don't have like a CPAP or, you're not on any kind of treatment schedule.
Sure. So, for those of you who don't know what sleep apnea is, it's a breathing disorder that occurs when you sleep. And what's essentially happening is when you fall asleep, your muscles relax, including the muscles in your neck area, and your airway can collapse, right? And when that happens, you stop breathing. And for a brief period of time, but usually enough time to the point where you are going to wake up, right? Briefly. Many times, again, you are not aware of the fact that you are waking up, but you are for a very short amount of time. And if you have sleep apnea, that process can happen many, many, many times a night. If it's bad enough, you can imagine somebody having 60 or more of those episodes per hour.
That's
So
crazy.
essentially, you are waking up briefly at least once every minute. And and so you can imagine what that is doing to the quality of your sleep. It's completely horrible. So if you have bad sleep apnea, it's not necessarily an issue of how much sleep you're getting, but it is another issue of really, really poor non-restorative sleep. So again, you can get 8 hours of sleep and feel horrible the next day. And the problem is that what it leads to is excessive and dangerous levels of sleepiness, right? So a lot of people with sleep apnea are prone to things like falling asleep unintentionally at a red light or in a conversation or at a meeting or all of these things. And those are versions of they're very similar to the microsleeps I was describing earlier. This is their body saying you are way too tired. You are not getting the sleep that you need. So I'm going to sort of shut you down and you're going to get some sleep. So why this is so important in utilities is the demographic. So sleep apnea is much more likely in men, right? And much more likely in men who are carrying around some extra weight, right? Especially in the neck region. And I should say that can be due to being overweight, but it can also be due to being very muscular as well, right? So any extra weight in your neck. So those are two really big risk factors. And the signs and symptoms to sort of look out for are if you are a regular snorer. Now, you can be a snorer and not have sleep apnea, but just about everybody with sleep apnea snores.
Okay.
And the telltale sign is if you sleep with a partner, so if there is somebody in bed with you at night and they have ever told you that you stop breathing for a period of time or that it sounds like you are choking, those are telltale signs um, that you almost certainly are dealing with sleep apnea. And the recommendation would be to tell your primary care provider that you have this concern. And they have these home tests these days that you can take home and wear for a night or two, return it, and they'll give you an indication of whether or not you have sleep apnea. If you do, there are really effective treatments, the most common being CPAP. It takes a little getting used to, but it's very effective when you use it. So
And that's the Darth Vader.
It's the Darth Vader one. It's the hose. It's the air. What it's essentially doing is it's keeping your airways open while you sleep, allowing you to get better quality sleep because you're not waking up every few seconds. So yeah, it's inconvenient. It does take some getting used to, but the impact it has on how you feel and how you perform the next day is profound.
And if you live alone, I mean, I suspect that people who live alone, they probably have some idea of how good their sleep is and that this might be a thing. But today with apps and trackers and all this kind of stuff, if somebody who lives alone wants to know if this is a problem that they're having, how could they tell?
Yeah, I would evaluate how you're feeling. Are you excessively tired the next day, regardless of how much sleep you got? So you got a good night's sleep and you still feel exhausted the next day. That's one important consideration. If you're male, if you're a little overweight, those are additional risk factors. If you don't know whether or not you snore, record yourself while you sleep. There's some ways of doing that. And if there's a couple of those that you can say yes to, it's worth talking to your doctor and potentially getting one of those home tests to one, identify it, or at least to rule it out.
Yeah, I just can't say enough about this. Just given my husband's family history, his dad and his grandfather, his dad's dad, both deceased, enlarged hearts, had massive sleep apnea. And my father-in-law just didn't really realize it until it had already gotten to a point where we knew, like, he obviously knew something was wrong. And so, yeah, the second that you have an indication, like, go and talk.
Yeah, it has huge impacts on long-term health. But the more immediate concern is just how alert and prepared and safe are you on the job too. I mean, that's a huge element in this as well. But yeah, if you, huge impact on long-term scary health outcomes.
Well, and it's almost like it feeds into each other, because I'm like, okay, well, you have sleep apnea, you're not sleeping well. Sometimes that leads to you're eating, so you're gaining weight because you're not sleeping right, you're stress eating or emotional eating, then you're gaining more weight, and then maybe it goes on your neck, and so the apnea gets worse, and it's just like a perpetuating cycle.
Yeah, I will comment briefly on that because that's a really important point. And one of the recommendations you will hear is if you get diagnosed with sleep apnea is you should try to lose weight. The problem is that it is incredibly hard to lose weight when you have untreated sleep apnea. If you're on a CPAP and you're sleeping well at night, you can lose weight. When you're untreated and getting really poor sleep night after night after night, it's incredibly hard to lose weight because our sleep really controls a couple of hormones that determine our hunger levels and how full we feel. So those get thrown completely out of whack. So you're eating more, you're not stopping, and you're so tired because you're not sleeping that you're not getting a lot of physical activity. And all of those things make it very difficult to lose weight.
Thank you for explaining all of that. I want to kind of, talk about the strategies now. We've talked about all of the things that can go wrong or, that can impact us physically, cognitively, but what are some things that both, as individuals we can do to improve our sleep quality, our sleep hygiene, but also some things that maybe culturally or otherwise that employers and organizations can do to, foster better sleep for their workers.
Sure. We'll break this one down into a few sort of sections
Okay.
uh, for a couple of reasons. Um, let's talk first about just what is a great strategy that all of us can be doing um, when our schedule allows. So I'm talking now to people who do not have a sleep disorder. So no insomnia and whatnot. What is something that we can all do to improve our sleep? And one of the best things you can do is to wake up at the same time every day. So consistency in our sleep is incredibly important. And again, it goes back to the circadian rhythm, which really relies on our patterns of behavior to dictate when it's going to make us more alert and when it's going to make us less alert and sleepy. So it is paying attention to our patterns of behavior. And if we are changing our schedule every night, it gets incredibly confused and it starts sending you the wrong signals at the wrong time. The best and most effective way of aligning your circadian rhythm is by setting a consistent wake up time and sticking to it 7 days a week. And that's challenging for a lot of people. But waking up at the same time each day is more important than going to sleep at the same time each day.
Really?
Right? So that would be my number one piece of advice. And I understand that that's challenging at times and doesn't necessarily apply when you're working storms or you're doing a long, irregular, rotating shifts. That's going to interfere. But when you are not, that is one of the best things that you can be doing for your sleep. That and reducing how much alcohol you're drinking. Those two things can do wonders for your sleep. Now, I want to shift gears slightly and talk to somebody. So about 30% of people listening to this deal with insomnia or symptoms of insomnia. That group is a little different. And what tends to happen, and I'll just give one piece of advice for that group. When somebody is struggling to sleep over an extended period of time, they start worrying more and more about their sleep and how little they're getting. And what is very common in those situations is that they move the time that they go to sleep earlier, right? Their logic being that if I go to sleep earlier, I'm giving myself more time to get the recommended amount of sleep I know I need, right? But unfortunately, when you move your bedtime earlier, you are sabotaging your sleep. There's a few things that control sleep, and by moving it earlier, you're setting yourself up for failure. So your circadian rhythm is still too high. Your sleep drive, which is a pressure to go to sleep, is lower if you go to bed earlier. So this is going to sound counterintuitive, but if you're listening to this and you've been dealing with insomnia for a long period of time, what I would actually recommend you doing is moving your bedtime later, right? I know that sounds crazy and scary
I
and
like it.
and I
Exactly.
get it. But if you sort of think about it from a different perspective, you are making yourself more tired, right? Your circadian rhythm is dipped lower, so you're not fighting it as much, and you're more likely to fall asleep faster. You do that night after night for a period of time, you start to lose that anxiety you have about going to bed, because going to bed means you're going to fall asleep kind of quickly. So that is the single best advice I can give you. There are other things, but that is the most impactful if you've got insomnia and you'd like to do something about it. So that is specific to those different groups. Now, you asked another question about. Can you remind me the last?
Sure. Yeah. We were talking about different skills for employers and employees or ideas. And also, about handling the fatigue and stuff
Yeah.
when, people are on storm restoration and things like that, where they can't implement, the kind of practices that you're talking about right now.
Right. Yeah, that's a very unique challenge. And there are times, I mean, we've got to be realistic. There are times when you're not going to get a window of time to get the recommended amount of sleep. It's just not going to happen when you are in an emergency situation.
Yeah. Or you're a new parent. I mean,
Or you're a new parent.
puppy owner. I know you said you just got a new puppy. Your schedule's loopy a little bit.
Absolutely just got a new puppy, and she is definitely interrupting sleep. But yes, absolutely. That's another wonderful example for all the parents out there. You can remember when your child was first born and how your sleep was impacted, right? It's unrealistic to think that your sleep is going to be good in those situations. So then it becomes, how are you going to manage it? How are you going to manage it as good and as safely as you can? For line workers doing storm restoration, one of the things I highly recommend is what I refer to as tactical napping. And it is using naps strategically and placed at somewhat regular intervals, short naps, right? Even 5 minutes can go a long way in fighting some fatigue and keeping you mentally sharp so you're not a liability to yourself or to somebody else, right? So tactical napping is a great one. Strategic use of caffeine, and caffeine can definitely have a negative impact on our sleep. But if you are going to be working a lengthy shift or you are going to be working at night, if you use caffeine, it can boost your alertness, it can keep you a little bit more awake. Uh, but you just want to use it early in your shift and not excessively, because then what's going to happen is it's going to start to bleed over and start negatively impacting your sleep when your shift is done.
Mm-hmm.
So caffeine stays in your system for a long period of time, 10 to 12 hours. So
Just
as
thinking about
long
people like myself who the caffeine does not affect us. That's part of that whole spectrum stimulant kind of thing where, first part of the population, we will fall asleep just as easily drinking caffeine.
This is the thing, the interesting thing about that though. I am also in that category. And the issue is though that just because we can fall asleep with caffeine, maybe even a lot of caffeine in our system,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean it's not having an impact on our sleep quality and our sleep architecture. So it is worthwhile, even for those of us who can sleep with caffeine in our system, to try to minimize it as much as possible, right? So to still have to move that caffeine early in the day to give ourselves 8 to 10 hours before going to bed, so that the vast majority of it is out of our system, right? But it can be used strategically, to maintain a certain level of alertness while you're at work or doing something dangerous. Um, but it's not as effective as nap. So whenever you can get a nap, so we talked about those micro sleeps. You're working a long, extended shift. You're about to get in your car and drive for an hour. Before driving, that is a wonderful time to take a 15-minute nap. It will greatly reduce the odds of you having a microsleep on the drive home.
Well, and this is I may get some listener hate, but what I was thinking about when you're talking about these naps is Kim Kardashian is one of these people. She's made it almost like a skill where she can fall asleep anywhere for like 5 to 10 minutes. And regardless of what you think of her as a person, this is somebody that does like a lot of things every day. And that's how part of how she's able to function like that is like all this stuff will be going on. They're in the car on the way somewhere and she's taking her 10-minute nap so she can go to the next place and be alert. So I think it's a good example of what you're talking about.
It is. Most people can't fall asleep as easily as that. So there are some strategies, making sure that you've got something to block out some noise, some earplugs, find some place safe to try to sleep in a truck or something like that. And making it routine. And, this going to your question about what can leadership do? This is a big one, encouraging things like this, building them into the schedules. If you are working longer than 16 hours, there needs to be a nap somewhere in there, or people are going to become incredibly compromised. We didn't talk about it, or I didn't bring it up, but just as an example, I always, if I'm speaking to a group of line workers, I ask them the question, or ask them to raise their hand if they'd be comfortable working next to somebody on a job site who is actively drunk. And nobody raises their hand. And then I ask, how many of you have worked 24 hours or more? And almost everybody raises their hand. And it's important to realize that when you've been awake, not simply working, but awake for 24 hours or more, some of your cognitive abilities, such as reaction time, is equivalent to somebody with a 0.1 blood alcohol level. So these are really big impacts that we're talking about. So where it starts to become more dangerous is sort of after that 16-hour mark. So if you are working more than 16 hours continuously, it's a great time to sort of break the crew. You can do it however you want to do it, but ensuring and encouraging some sort of brief tactical napping during that. The other way to look at it is we're talking about it from a safety standpoint, and that's incredibly important. But from a productive standpoint as well, it's going to go a long way in terms of how quickly a crew is able to work, how quickly and efficiently a crew is able to work, meaning you're going to finish sooner as well.
Yeah. And I think sometimes sleep gets this reputation as it like means like you're weak, like, oh, I don't need to sleep, and so there's some of that stigma too that needs to go. But just, yeah, in that planning, I think it's such a great idea to just be like, just like if it's hot out, you have a place where people can cool down. You have to have a place where people can rest, or, a part of the parking lot that's blocked, taped off so people want to go to their trucks, like you said, and have a nap. Just finding ways that you can work that into your job planning so that it's considered, and then nobody has to worry about being, the wimp who needs a nap,
Correct. Yeah. Now, I mean, we're starting to talk about just the cultural shift that needs to change, right? We need to stop praising sleep deprivation and actually encouraging proper rest. I mean, it literally helps everybody. It also helps the company.
I mean, it's such a liability. You know, my husband, before he moved jobs, he worked he was a stagehand. And so he worked for a local in Chicago. And yeah, they had these crazy hours. And one morning at like 7:30 on a Sunday, he called me because he was at the gas station because he had been driving home in the middle of the night, stopped at a stoplight, decided he was going to put his car in park and go to sleep. So the police pulled up behind him at like 4 in the morning with his engine running at an intersection, um, completely unconscious because he was tired. And I mean, at least his brain did the thing where it was like, guess we need to be safe. But that's really crazy stuff. And he's not even working with like live electricity, potentially. So, yeah, all of this stuff is so important. And I'm very appreciative that you're taking your time to explain this stuff to us and give us some ways to help people approach this. Did you have other recommendations, other strategies that you wanted to talk about?
The last one I'll give you is just, you know, after a long shift, your adrenaline is high for prolonged periods of time when you are at work. And a lot of times people struggle to wind down at the end of a day. And there are several strategies. I know we don't have a ton of time, but some of them are like controlled breathing techniques. I like using something called box breathing. I used it with the SEAL community quite a bit. You can find that online. But another strategy is actually to take a real hot, like a jacuzzi, a sauna, a hot shower 30 minutes before going to bed. It actually jump starts a natural cooling process in our core that helps us calm down, but also jumpstart the sleep process. So it just means that you're increasing the speed at which you can fall asleep at night. So when you have a short window, maybe you're working a storm and you have 8 hours, but you've got travel time, you've got meal time, you've got all of these things that are cutting into your available sleep time. This is just trying to help you maximize the available window that you do have. Something like that can help speed it up.
Well, so Eric, I really want to thank you for, again, for being here today and sharing so much of your expertise with us. And I just wanted to ask you before we kind of close things out, is there anything else that you wanted to mention to our listeners that might be helpful for them?
The only thing I'm going to again reach out to the people listening who are struggling with their sleep.
Mhm.
I just want to sort of convey the message that there are actually really effective ways of dealing with insomnia, sleep apnea, shift work disorder. I know we didn't talk a lot about those individually, but if you're someone who knows that you are struggling, like you want better sleep, but you're having a hard time getting it, there are actually really effective ways that aren't discussed that much out there and do not include medication. So bring it up with your physician, ask for more resources. There's quite a bit out there. And the nice thing is not only is it effective, many of them work very quickly. So if you're discouraged, know that there are answers out there.
Well, yeah, and I think I think once you hit a certain stage in life, and maybe this is just me personally, but you almost forget that like things keep progressing. So, like I'm almost 50 and I'm like, all this stuff has happened. And in my brain, nothing, everything is the same as it was in the 80s or 90s, but all of this evolution and research and all kinds of things are always ongoing. And so even if you think you've tried everything, there might be something new out there that you can try that can help you and, get your sleep, back to how it should be.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much again, Eric. I really appreciate your time today. As a note to our listeners, if you'd like to reach out to him, we've posted Eric's contact information at utilitysafety.podbean.com. And you can also visit the Peak Sleep website at peaksleep.com. That's PEAK sleep.com. Until next time, stay safe and be well. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Utility Business Media and its employees. It is strongly recommended that you discuss any actions or policy changes with your company management prior to implementation.